Welcome back, chess fans. In today's video, we'll be diving into a brilliant game played by Bobby Fischer, where he unleashed yet another vicious attack, this time against a very strong Argentinian Grandmaster Oscar Panno. It is a masterpiece that perfectly showcases Fischer's attacking prowess. So grab your popcorn and let's go. So the year is 1970 and Bobby Fischer is playing against Oscar Panno, an Argentinian Grandmaster, and we're in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So here Fischer opens up with e4, Black plays the Sicilian defense, knight to f3, e6, and then d3 chosen by Fischer, his beloved close Sicilian setup. Fischer is going to go g3, bishop g2 and castle, after which he will start pushing his pawns in the center. So here knight to c6 chosen by Black, pawn to g3, pawn to g6, both sides fianchetto their bishops, castles, knight to e7, and then rook e1 chosen by Fischer. This rook is always a great piece on e1 because in a lot of lines after this pawn ends up on e5, generally the correct way to create counterplay in these sorts of scenarios is to play pawn to f6, after which this e6 pawn remains sort of weak. That's assuming if d5 is played, of course, and you will see. So here pawn to d6 chosen by Black, Fischer plays c3, what we just talked about pretty much, castles, and then pawn to d4, Fischer grabs the whole center. Here an exchange occurs on d4 and then pawn to d5 chosen by Black. Now instead of pawn to d5, perhaps a better move would have been queen b6 in order to attack this pawn, or even pawn to b5 in order to put this bishop on b7 and just simply continue developing. But in this case, Oscar Panno chose d5 because he thought that this would give him the most chances to win this game. So after d5, Fischer goes e5, and here we see sort of the usefulness of these two pawns. These two pawns are successfully negating the activity of this bishop on g7. First of all, this bishop is passive. Well, that's the case in many openings, of course. The queenside bishop for Black is usually the problem piece in a lot of openings. But in this case, this bishop is also not great because it's just looking at granite. These two pawns are restricting it severely. Even though we do give Black the f5 square, this doesn't help him that much because we can always kick the knight out with g4. And if a move like h5 is played, in a lot of cases we have moves like bishop to h3. Not immediately, but if this knight, for example, goes to f5, in a lot of these scenarios we can simply go bishop h3 and exchange this bishop for the knight, damage the structure, and if g takes, then there's a big attack on the king side, eventually lining up with bishop g5, queen d2. If this pawn takes, then this is kind of weak. So there are many ideas here. I'm not gonna go into even more detail. We're already off the path here. So here e5 was played, and then bishop to d7 chosen by Oscar Panno. And what he's gonna do is he's gonna try to create play on the queen side while Fischer tries to develop his pieces and create an attack on the king side. So knight to c3 chosen by Fischer, rook to c8, bishop to f4, simply developing, knight to a5 chosen by Oscar, rook to c1, and then pawn to b5 chosen by Black. Pawn to b3, controlling this c4 square, not allowing this knight to jump there. Pawn to b4, knight back to e2, and then bishop to b5, both sides simply maneuvering here. Queen to d2 chosen by Fischer, and then knight back to c6 because this pawn was also under attack. Queen d2 is a multi-purpose move. It attacks the pawn on b4, but it also lines up a battery over here. So Oscar Panno has to defend the pawn. He defended with knight to c6, and then pawn to g4, an amazing move chosen by Fischer. And this move does two things. First and foremost, it controls these two squares. h5 is not a possibility anymore because then you would take and severely damage Black's structure, and then you would have a lot of attacking opportunities. And also it takes control of this f5 square, and the knight on e7 stays very passive for a very long time. So that's number one. Number two, this frees up the g3 square, and this knight on e2, which right now doesn't really have any purpose. It's only serving a defensive purpose, which means it's basically defending d4, but d4 already has enough defenders, so this knight will actually be a very useful attacker. Once it goes to g3 and Fischer mobilizes his h-pawn, he will push h4, h5, and this knight on g3 is simply going to be a fantastic attacking piece. So here, pawn to a5 chosen by Oscar. He has to generate play somewhere. The problem is this is just too slow. Even if he pushes a4 and gets a pawn break here, it's just too slow. He's not going to have enough time to target this pawn on b3. It takes like 4 moves to go a4, capture, rook a8, rook a3. That's how you attack this pawn on b3. But even if he does that, Fischer can easily defend it with like rook b1, for example. That's a very simple defensive move. So there's no time to go for something like this. Meanwhile, Fischer's attack is going to be far more lethal, and you're going to see what he does next. So first of all, he plays knight to g3, queen to b6 chosen by black, and then pawn to h4. So Fischer is just attacking right now. Knight to b8 chosen by black. Here he realized that going for a4 probably was not the best choice because it's too slow. Black doesn't really have a lot of play because black never played f6 in order to activate his bishop and the rook. So the problem is, if black didn't play f6 and black didn't play a4, there's no way to generate any sort of play with the black pieces. So the only thing you can do here with black is to trade the rooks and trade both pair of rooks and just try to weather the storm that's coming on the king side, and maybe you can get a draw at the end, maybe, if you're like a very, very high level player. But this position is really bad. Maybe Magnus would defend this with black, but it's very, very difficult to defend. So bishop to h6 chosen by Fischer, knight to d7, queen to g5, simply bringing the pieces near the king, potentially threatening takes and knight h5, also threatening the knight on e7. So takes on c1, bishop takes h6. Yeah, he has to deal with this knight hanging somehow, so Oscar chooses bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, and then rook to c8. He's just trying to trade off all the pieces and basically stop Fischer's attack. So Fischer obliges and trades the rooks, but he continues hammering with h5. And here, queen to d8 is played. Actually, it's quite a natural move because there's really not much you can do in this position. Like, what do you play here, right? You could theoretically go knight to f8 and start with this move, which is probably the best move, but Fischer's still going to continue his attack. He's going to go queen g5, play h6, and then queen f6 and checkmate you on the g7 square. He doesn't just have to like jump in with his pieces and just start sacrificing everything. But here, queen to d8 was played, and Fischer went knight g5. Now he's attacking the pawn on h7, threatening checkmate in 2. Knight to f8 is played, defending against that threat, and here Fischer sacrifices his bishop and plays an amazing move, bishop to e4. Now, this bishop was not accepted during the game, but let me show you what happens if it was accepted. So if this bishop is accepted, Fischer would have captured on e4 with this knight on g3, this knight that was supposed to be sort of useless on e2. Now it's jumping to f6 with devastating threats. So how do you defend this? So first of all, if you just simply allow this jump to f6, you just get checkmated with knight f7 because this pawn is extremely weak. If you defend the pawn on f7 with a move like bishop to e8, it doesn't matter because knight f6 anyways, and now this knight on f8 is hanging, so it's still checkmate. And the worst thing is, if you defend it with the queen, you lose the queen and you still get checkmated because there's a checkmate on g7. If the knight is captured, there's checkmate on f8. So it's still checkmate one way or another, and Fischer gets what he wants. So going back, that's why this bishop was not accepted, and instead queen to e7 was played. But after queen e7, Fischer sacrificed another piece. He went knight takes h7 here, and after knight takes h7, he simply continues going forward. He does not go back here. He does not try to defend this bishop. You know, it's still hanging. He just keeps coming at you with all of his resources. He just uses everything that he has in his toolbox. So h takes g6, f takes g6, and bishop takes g6. Now this knight on g3 will actually join the attack, going to h5 and then going to f6. So knight to g5 chosen by Oscar, knight to h5 chosen by Fischer. Oscar here gave a couple of checks. He played knight f3, but none of these checks really help him because Fischer just simply walks up with his king, and after knight captures on g6, Fischer doesn't even take back. He starts with knight to f6. This is even more accurate. The best move in the position is to sacrifice the queen, which delays checkmate for a couple of moves. But here Oscar played queen to f7, and after queen to h7 or king to f7, after queen h7 here he simply resigned the game because the only move in the position is king f8, after which queen g8 is just simply mate in one. So absolutely vicious attack performed by Bobby Fischer. That's why he's probably one of the best attacking players in history. He had amazing positional play, and he also had an amazing attacking game. And you can see how effectively he's able to initiate these attacks, even with a fianchettoed position. Like you're gonna see, okay, the rook is not on h1. You know, both sides have castled. Let me just go to this position right here. Both sides have castled. The rook is not on h1. Like you can't do anything here. But Fischer always finds a way, sooner or later, to generate some sort of an attack on the black king. So I hope you guys enjoyed this game, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.